Hello and welcome to History Delights. Kevin and I are in Buena Vista County, Iowa, in a little town called Albert City. Say hello, Kevin.
Hi, Tom.
Well, we're nestled in the farmland, the prairie, and it conjures up images of the blackland farmer when the area first settled, the mules and the horses and breaking the prairie. But in 1901, a very unexpected event happened right here in this little town. And Kevin and I are here to explore this wonderful story. Well, good morning once again. We're in front of the old train depot here in Albert City, Iowa. And I have a nice young couple here. And on to my left is
Dick Aronson.
And Dick, what is your relationship with the depot here?
I am the president of the Albert City Historical Association.
Okay, and this young lady to my right?
That's my wife, Sandy.
Well, hi, Sandy. How are you?
Good.
Say hello to everybody.
Hello.
So we're going to be going inside and we're going to learn about an event that happened in 1901. Something you would never suspect in this little small farming community, would you?
Yep, I'm sure it was a surprise.
It was a surprise. So why don't we head on in and we'll start the story from inside. Just to kind of set the background here a little bit, tell me if I'm understanding this right. In November 1901, there was a bank robbery held in Greenville, Iowa, which is just up the road here about 40 miles. And 3 men partook in that bank robbery. And they rode the train down here to Albert City, and they thought it's a small little town here. They could rest easy because communications was difficult back in those days. They thought they could get a meal and wait for a train to get out of town and make their escape. Do I have the basic story correct?
Well, I think so. Basically, the way I understood it, from that, I don't know whether they rode a train down here or they had a pump car.
Oh, okay.
That they came down the tracks. Sure. And then they came in the depot, and it was a cool day, so they were huddled around the stove. And in the meantime, Marshal Lodine had received some sort of message to be on the lookout for 3 gentlemen who had robbed a bank in Greenville, and they were possibly headed south from Greenville. And someone had spotted these guys in the depot and came down and told the marshal that there's 3 strangers that kind of fit the prescription. And so the marshal kind of gathered a few people to come down and confront them. And when they came down here to confront them, why, then the robbers were shooting out, and the Albert City locals and the marshal were shooting in. And that's where you see the bullet holes in the walls over there. And all the lead had been dug out over the years.
There, over here.
Yes.
Quite a few bullet holes there.
64 shots were fired, I believe.
Of course, now the depot's been turned into the museum, but we think the stove kind of sat right here.
Yes.
We see the chimney.
Yes.
Up here. So they were kind of hiding behind the stove and use that as some cover too,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So a gun battle ensues. Now, was all the posse armed? It's my understanding some of them were and some of them weren't. Is that,
Well,
do you know? Or maybe they don't know for sure.
I don't know for sure from the history, but there were several of them that were armed. And, well, the marshal was armed, and I believe Sunblad was armed, and there was a Conlon that was armed. And I guess without reading, the information who the other gentlemen are.
I think what I'll do is take the article that I found online and I'll make a list and post that in here in the video of everyone that was on the posse that we know of anyway. So the shootout ensues. Was anyone killed or injured while in here? There was no one killed while inside none of the robbers were killed inside the depot, or was that?
I don't know exactly where they were hit, but the sheriff was wounded in here, and he crawled outside and hid in a cellar or something.
Okay.
Wherever that.
So the sheriff is down.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think one of the bank robbers, either there or right when they tried to flee.
Okay. I know one of the bank robbers was killed.
Yes.
Is that actually, he's buried out in the cemetery here just west of town?
Yes.
Now, it's my understanding. Okay, we got another fascinating little tidbit of trivia here about this robbery. Do you want to share with us here, Sandy?
Well, they didn't really know they didn't know the bank robber's real name, but he died, so they're deciding what they should do with this bank robber. So it says they made a very rough box from some packing boxes and some scrap lumber, and they loaded the body into the box and nailed it shut. And there were 5 or 6 of us that went to the cemetery on Jim Olson's drag wagon. A round hole had already been dug, and this crude coffin was rolled into it. A creamery man named Geyer threw a handful of dirt on it and said, "Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. If God won't have you, the devil must." And that was the only ceremony. And he's saying, "I've never forgotten it."
So one died. What happened to the other 2? They stood trial and they were given life sentences?
Well, when they stood trial, they decided that they were going to die by hanging, but they turned it into life sentences.
Okay.
So one died in 1911 and the other one in 1925.
And once again, in prison. They never knew their real names. It's kind of my understanding they didn't want to give their correct names because they didn't want to dishonor their family names. So
That's correct.
they all took their names to the grave, didn't they?
Yes.
Yep, just west of town.
Yes.
Now, it's my understanding that they never knew his name. There was no identification on him at that time.
I don't think they knew any of the robbers' names. They gave false names.
Right. So even they took their names to their graves quite literally with them. They would not
Yes.
give up their names, and they wouldn't tell the name of the robber that was shot and killed. But it is interesting here, a few years ago, tombstone was purchased and placed on his grave out there, and it just says bank robber on it.
Right.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
The museum purchased the stone and put it out there.
Wow, that's great. Fantastic. So now we know that one of the robbers was shot dead. We know that the marshal was wounded, but there were some more injuries
And
or
there
deaths,
was
right?
a local man, a Sunblad, that was wounded and died too.
And he was part of the posse.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. I was thinking there was 3 deaths. But was there only 2?
No, the bank robber, the marshal, and the posse member.
Okay, so the marshal did end up dying then later.
Yes,
So there
yes.
was a total of 3.
Yes.
Okay. So they had the big shootout, and they shoot their way out of here, kind of Bonnie and Clyde style. What happens to them once they get outside of the train depot?
Well, the way they escaped is a train happened to come in.
Okay.
And of course, that gave the robbers some cover. So then they were able to escape. And they tried to confiscate several different buggies or whatever and to get out of town. And but the buggy that they did confiscate was from a Mrs. Anderson who was coming into town.
Okay.
And she had a couple of daughters with her.
Now, this must be quite shocking to her. She's just in her buggy with her daughters coming to town, probably to do some shopping or something.
I'm sure.
I mean, what a surprise, right?
Yes. I mean, you just don't expect that to happen.
Right.
And so then they took off in the buggy, and the horse was old and slow. So they abandoned the buggy, the 2 robbers that were left. They abandoned it and then took off into the fields. And then when the buggy was discovered, in that buggy was a note, and we have a copy of the original note right over there.
Okay.
And there was also $11 there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm sure that was probably stolen money.
Sure.
And we have one of the original $1 bills from the money that was left there, and then the family had spent the $10.
Wow. Dollar bills sure looked a lot different back then, didn't they?
Yes, they were quite a bit bigger, and I think that's what they called like a blanket dollar bill.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And then we have
There's the revolver.
yeah, and that's from one of the bank robbers.
Wow. That's pretty neat. And you got some of the cartridges with it too.
Yes, there's some ammunition there.
That's interesting.
And we also we used to have a rifle that was that was used by one of the posse guys, but the family had just loaned that to the museum,
Right.
and then the younger generation decided to take it out, so we
Sure.
no longer have that rifle.
Okay. But the rifle exists.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yes. And then later on, that horse died,
Okay.
and they made a horse blanket out of it, and we were able to get that. And so, you know, everything just kind of fell together,
It sure did.
you know, and of course that made this building through. After we started the association, we worked and got this building on the National Registry of Historic Places.
Oh, wonderful.
And we have the plaque over there on the wall.
Sure. Yep.
And
So the doctor in town treated these people, and we have his book, his day book.
Oh, okay. Let's step into the other room here. Okay. Let's step into the other room here.
And you can take a picture, whatever, but. So this is the original, Dr. Allen Bridge was his name, and this was his day book and his cash book.
Okay.
Okay, so this is a primary source of the history. So here you see on 1901, November 16th, he starts out with his treating the people, and here, burglar, visited twice and dressed wounds. Charles Lodine, dressed wounds and calls. John Sumblad, dressed wounds and called 4 times. You see, he charged $3, $2, and $2.
Wow.
And as it goes on to the next day, on the 17th, he visited the burglar again for $2. Charles Lodine visit, and his father drove him, whatever, the doctor's father, I'm assuming, but 2 visits at $1.50 each. Then he visited the posse guy, John Sumblad, 3 visits. And then on the 18th, he visited the marshal again. And on the 19th, he visited the marshal. I can't read what that says there. He visited and consulted Charles Lodine, the marshal. Visited and rubbed, I suppose, some kind of ointment on him or something. On the 20th, he visited him. $2 for that visit. On the 21st, he visited 4 times, and Charles Lodine visit 5:30 p.m. The 21st, again, Charles Lodine visit and nursed from 10 p.m. till November 23rd, 2 a.m. So he's there 28 hours with the marshal. And then that's the end of, it doesn't say the other people died, but I'm assuming so because they're not in the book again.
That's fascinating
Isn't
to
that
have
wonderful?
to have such a
Yes.
primary source like
Yeah,
that. You know,
it's very rare. to have that
as you're
book
checking
around.
out history, a lot of times you don't get to see primary sources, or
mm-hmm.
the primary source has been lost. So that's very interesting. Thanks for sharing that and bringing that up to us. Now, if I understand this correctly, the depot's not on its original spot. Is that correct?
That's right.
So where was it originally?
Well, originally it was about a half a block to a block east of here, right along the tracks, kind of in amongst the elevator.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was moved here and turned
So,
180 degrees.
so it faces the street there?
So it faced the street.
Okay. And the building that housed the restaurant, is that building still up downtown, or we don't know? I'm not sure which
don't
building
know.
it was.
I'm not sure what restaurant that they were in. As far as I know, the robbers weren't ever in the restaurant.
Okay,
Yes,
but
they were eating there.
Oh, they were?
They were eating there, and the sheriff spotted them, and that's when he rounded up.
Okay.
But
Yep.
I don't know where that building was.
Yeah.
yeah, okay. Well, great.
Because there were several restaurants in Albert City,
Sure.
I don't know.
you know, back then, so,
Okay.
or over the years, so I'm not sure on that.
Okay. Well, this has just been fascinating, but you had, just to wrap things up, you had a little bit of a story behind that day book and how you discovered it and how important it was.
Yes. And there was a visitor to our museum, and he was a former lawman. He was a state trooper. And he liked history of lawmen and lawmen that were killed in action. And so he had heard about this, and so he was investigating some of the history. And in the history of this gun battle, it was at one time declared one of the bloodiest gun battles in the state of Iowa. And then then that officer was looking through this daybook of Dr. Bridge and found that stuff that we hadn't seen before,
Right.
or hadn't taken the time to go through page by page.
Sure.
And that was very interesting to
It kind of leapt off the pages at you.
yes,
didn't
it just
that's wonderful.
lifted quite a bit more to this story, or documented it,
Absolutely.
through, yeah.
So I do want to just say there's beyond this fascinating story and this wonderful piece of history, you've done a wonderful job here with the museum. Can you tell us a little bit more about this museum, or how it got started? And
Sure. It started in 1974. There was an article in the Albert City paper, a couple paragraphs that said, let's get together and preserve these things. And so we met in the city hall, about 30 people, and decided we wanted to save these things. So they pursued articles of incorporation and wanted to have the depot as their museum. Well, the railroad was still using it and wouldn't sell it to us. So we bought the house next door here. A lady was moving. So they went and they did canvass the town and said what we wanted to do, and people contributed to the project to buy the house for $10,000 in 1974. And then we started turning it into the period of 1901, the house, what it looked like then. And as soon as we got the house done, it took about a year and a half, the depot wanted to sell the building. So they sold it for $1, and then we moved it to this location.
wow.
And started over.
So I just want everyone to know that there's a lot more to this museum. It's a fabulous museum. Kevin and I have had the opportunity to visit a lot of local museums, and they are wonderful. It's amazing what's just right underneath your nose, isn't it? The local history.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So this is not, it's open to the public, but it's not open on a regular basis. They need to call to get an appointment. Is that correct?
Yep.
Yes.
And what phone number would that be?
Well, you can call 712-291-1434.
Okay, and I'll put that down in the description box below this video if you'd like to come and visit this museum, and I highly encourage you. So thank you so much for sharing your time with Kevin and I and all of the viewers. I'm sure they're really going to enjoy this.
Yes.
Once again, thank you so much for your time and your generosity and
You bet.
all of your knowledge, because we don't always get it right. It's good to have the experts. So until next time, have a very delightful day.